So let's just clarify this whole PPA Act of 2021. If you take a look at it, it's an administrative procedure. And basically what was going on prior to that act being enacted by Governor Hochul, what was happening is that you have all these different hiring practices from all these law enforcement agencies. So the purpose of that act was to have a uniform process for all of the law enforcement agencies so they can comply with the Municipal Police Training Council. That's what it was for. An administrative agency can't trump a law. And if you look at their memorandum, it specifically says a licensed psychologist. There's only one board that can license psychologists, and that's the New York State Education Department, period. There are no exceptions. And by the way, I searched all over for the exemptions. And if you take a look at, I sent down on Twitter this. And this is why I like to do this, because, I don't really use social media, but I use it for stuff like this. If you specifically look, right? See, even that, it says to be evaluated by a qualified psychologist or psychiatrist. Nowhere in this announcement or this policy does it say you're exempt or anyone's exempt. Matter of fact, you can always see the exemptions in 2022. And if you go to my Twitter feed, I actually tell you when it happens. And it doesn't mention the NYPD. If you can pull up the Twitter feed real quick, I'll just read it to you. It says right here. First of all, I want to tell you something about administrative agency. The criminal justice is an administrative agency. And there's a case that I actually put out there so people can read it. Administrative regulations must be consistent with the legislative intent and statutory framework. They cannot expand or restrict the scope of a statute beyond what the legislature has authorized. See matter of General Electric Capital Corporation versus the New York State Division of Tax Appeals, 2 New York 3rd, page 249, 2004. So even if the NYPD wanted to interpret the PPA or the NYCRR as granting them an exemption, that interpretation would be invalid because no regulation can authorize the conduct that legislation has criminalized. Bam, that's your answer. Now, since everyone keeps talking about exemptions, I'm going to tell you what they are. Temporary public agency exemptions expire in 2022. Between 2018 and 2022, New York permitted temporary exemptions from licensure requirements for psychologists employed by very specific public agencies, OMH, OPWDD, DOCCS, etc., under Chapter 57 of the laws of 2018 and later Chapter 159 of the laws of 2021. These did not apply to the NYPD. And in any event, they expired in June 24, 2024. The NYPD has never been listed among the agencies for an exemption. And by the way, I went back and researched this. I went through the whole legislative history, all the changes from the time 6512, where it's a felony, it applies to all professions. You don't have a license, you're a licensed professional in New York, it's a felony. It's clear as day. If you look all the way back when the law was first enacted, all the changes are actually posted before. Nowhere does it say the NYPD is exempt. Zero. Matter of fact, if you look, and that's another thing that came up, no one can use the word doctor unless you are licensed, because that would mislead the public to believe that you are a licensed professional. And let's talk about licensed profession. If you're one of the licensed professions in the state of New York, the only way you can hold yourself out, you have to pass. For example, if you graduate with a degree in psychology, let's say you get a PSY, psychology, guess what you are? You're a graduate. That's it. You cannot say you're a doctor. You can't say you're a psychologist, because that would lead the public to believe that you are licensed within the meaning of a statute to perform those services. It's just like a lawyer. You graduate from law school, guess what you are? A law school graduate. You can say JD, but you certainly can't say you're a lawyer, because if you go out there and say you're a lawyer, guess what? That's an unauthorized practice of law. These laws are in place to protect the general public from people who are not considered safe to practice in the craft that they may have learned in school, because all people that go to school don't eventually get licensed. And that's the case here. And they keep talking about exemptions. I keep hearing this. Where? Point it out. And I'll be the first one to stop this whole litigation, the investigation. I'll stop it right now. But there are no exemptions. I searched this thing backward and forward. And guess what you come up with? No matter how many times you look at it, saying you're a psychologist is a violation of law in the state of New York. And one other thing, Sal, I want to say, I keep hearing about these kids. First of all, if you're going to school and getting your PhD, they're probably in their 40s. They're not 20-something years old. They're either in their late 30s, early 40s, sometime older than that. And one of the things when you graduate, because I know when I went to law school, they did it. And yeah, although it's a different profession, you still have to be licensed. They tell you specifically, these are the requirements you need to meet in order to become a lawyer. Now that you graduate law school, you have to pass the bar, you have to pass the character and fitness, and then you have to get approved to become licensed to practice in the state of New York. And I'm sure they tell them that for the medical schools, the psychology schools, and all the other professionals, the same thing. So when people say, I didn't know, no, I don't believe that. That makes no sense.
I looked at like I said, the exemption, also the legislative jacket. Also, Grace had mentioned that we lost her again. She must be having like a lot of Wi-Fi problems, but she mentioned in the article about not only about the exemptions, but everything she's pointed at, right? They don't have an answer for. These guys are making overtime, right? 50,000 hours she could find, which is even worse. And then these guys keep citing this exemption. Now, remember what I had said. Going back all the way, right? Because I think you just destroyed their whole argument, even if they say anything. There's someone that we found out worked for the education board way back in the 80s. What do they have to say about this?
When we talk about it? Okay. So first of all, you think this is a new issue. I've talked about this since at least 2005. And I brought cases against the city. And by the way, I settled cases against the city for this too. So this is not a new issue. It's just now I'm taking it on in a major way. And this all started because the police department tried to go after Anderson. That's how this all started. And then I started digging into it more, then became my interest. And I said, you know what? I think it's time to start litigating this. And then start looking at the fact that they were unlicensed and criminal. So this is not a new thing. The article didn't start it. Actually, I've been talking about this already. You can look up the cases. I have a history of this since at least 2005. So this is not a new issue. It's just now I'm using a different angle because what I was using before is saying that the police department is not following the uniform guidelines of employee selection procedures, which is the UGESP, which is a federal law out of the case of Griggs versus Duke Powell, which basically says if an employer uses a tool, a diagnostic tool, a test, you have to meet these requirements. One that is valid and is consistent and it doesn't have a disparate impact upon protected categories, race, national origin, age, gender, and disability. Other than that, it's invalid. And the police department, even back in 2012, when I brought those cases, they immediately settled them as soon as it wasn't dismissed. Immediate settlement, more than $200,000 a piece. And that was back in 2012. This is a bigger problem because not only do they not follow the UGESP, guarantee they don't follow it, they don't follow the basic and licensing statutes. And now we know 55 or 74 is more than what? 3/4? That's more than 2/3 of the people who are working there. And now, since I've spoken to a person that just happened to be listening to the show, and he says, wow, this is interesting. You know why? Because when I was with the police department, I took a leave of absence. And guess where he worked? The New York State Education Department. And you know what he said? I used to investigate these kind of cases. And quote, unless the laws have changed since the early 80s, which they have not substantially changed, there are no exceptions for the police department. It's actually a crime to hold yourself out as a doctor or psychologist or to assess, because that's part of assessment. If you look up 7601, it tells you assessments is a broad category. It's a diagnostic tool. If you're giving an opinion about someone based upon an interview that you shouldn't be doing solo, by the way, that they are doing, So they're acting as doctors. Guess what that is? That's an E felony in the state of New York. The problem is most people never knew this. The employees, the applicants, no one ever talked about that. But now they're going to know about it now. So this is more than just having a podcast. This is performing a public service. And if the police department can point to one law or rule right now, I'll stop the investigation right now. And you know what they haven't done? They haven't pointed to the exception. And it's not the NYCRR. Read it yourself. It's an administrative policy. It says, hey, we have this hodgepodge way of looking at cops. And you know what? We should all look at them the same way. Because if the NYPD won't hire them, they shouldn't meet the standards of all the other 600 some odd public police agencies in the state of New York. It should be uniform, not just everyone does what the hell they want to do.